I think we are very excited that you're all interested. There's more people coming in here, so we'll just wait a little bit. Yeah, we're very excited. Eva Antonievich here and Alicia Burns. Tessa is away today, and we are running this webinar with Elliot Onasket. Elliot is a cultural facilitator working for the Okanagan Nation Alliance, and he will start with our opening remarks. Thank you, Elliot.
Awesome. Thank you, Eva. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elliot Tenasket. I'm the cultural facilitator for the Okanagan Nation Alliance Natural Resources Department. I am honored to welcome you here today to the siwڵkʷ webinar, Our Ancient Species, where we'll connect through the land and waters spanning from the headwaters to the mouth of the mighty Columbia as it joins the big waters of the Pacific. It is a pleasure to have an amazing gathering of passionate human beings like yourselves. Over the next hour, we'll have an exciting lineup of great speakers who will share their expertise on ancient species. We believe their insights and knowledge will be valuable to each of you. I encourage you to actively participate in the questions period at the end of the webinar. Thank you all for being here, and let's dive into the waters of the Pacific lamprey, the Okanagan crayfish, white sturgeon, and mountain beaver, as I turn it over to our guest speakers to introduce themselves, starting with John Box.
Hi, everybody. Like Elliot said, John Box. I'm a fisheries biologist with the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. Calling in from the field today, so a little bit of shade on my eyes. Yeah, so my main job is I'm a habitat restoration biologist, primarily focused on steelhead restoration in the United States portion of the Okanagan. And one of the cool side projects I get to do is I also kind of moonlight as one of our lamprey biologists, and work on the reintroduction of lamprey into the Okanagan Basin. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Oop. I think I just sent in a request to share, and then I'll pull up my PowerPoint. All right, is everyone seeing this in presentation mode? Excellent. So yeah, like I said, biologist, Colville tribes. I'm just going to give a brief history of lamprey, but lamprey, they're, as we're talking about, they're an ancient species. They first appeared on the fossil record 450 million years ago, just about 250 million years ago before sturgeon, similar for the dinosaurs. A heck of a lot earlier than salmon, and certainly for humans. They really, really have not changed much through their history, and currently they can be found in the waters of 6 different continents. They haven't really made it into Africa for some reason, but even off the coast of Antarctica, they can be found. I've got a few historic pictures from the state side of the Okanagan. Some of the gathering places for lamprey that the Colville tribes used was Kettle Falls in the Upper Columbia. We've got a photo of adults on the right clinging to rocks. They use their sucker mouths to move up rocks and cascades. That's where they're the most visible and the most easy to gather. And then in the top there, we've got a photo of some air-dried lamprey that were gathered at Kettle Falls as well. Another spot in the main stem Okanagan where they've been observed, or historically were observed, was in the 1889. Here is a journal entry from a fellow that was fishing at Coyote Falls just below Enlow Dam. No idea how well he did fishing, but they did see a good many large eels trying to get over the falls. In 2010, sorry for the text slide here, but I got some bullet points to get through. The Colville tribes have a monitoring and evaluation program that is primarily focusing on catching juvenile steelhead. As part of those surveys, though, they also have lamprey that they observe. And in 2010, that was the last year that lamprey were observed in our juvenile sampling for steelhead, with none observed between then and 2019. The tribes, working with some of the PUDs as well as the Yakima Nation, began to release lamprey back into the Okanagan in 2017 in the siwڵkʷ, then 2018 in Omak Creek and Salmon Creek, which are tributaries of the Okanagan. And immediately 2018 put some adults in, and the next year, what do you know, juveniles showed up. Currently, we release in 4 different tributaries of the Okanagan. Lindgren Creek, Salmon Creek, and Omak Creek are all further down in the states near the town of Okanagan. We also release into the siwڵkʷ below Coyote Falls and Enlow Dam. And the goal with our lamprey releases is that they are going into tributaries of the Okanagan rather than the main stem, because the water temperatures in the summer are a lot cooler. Typically, our source for adult fish is from either the Yakima Nation has a small lamprey hatchery, or more frequently they are captured at main stem fish ladders and translocated upstream. Probably to back up a little bit, the likely reason that lamprey stopped being observed in 2010 was a combination of a lot of irrigation withdrawals in tributaries of the Okanagan, as well as the challenges for lamprey passing through some of the fish ladders in the main stem dams. Fish ladders tend to have concrete 90-degree edges, and the sucker mouths on lamprey don't deal well with hard 90-degree corners. So there's been a series of efforts all throughout the Columbia to make lamprey friendly fish ladders. Got a couple different examples of lamprey here. On the left, we have some juveniles in a couple different life stages. So the smaller lamprey, or the smaller lamprey on the left, lower down is a larval lamprey. At that point in their life, they are a filter feeder that live in the fine substrate in the rivers and creeks. Then they transform. It's a similar process to steelhead in that they're getting ready to smolt and go to the ocean. At that point, they develop eyes. They're functionally blind up until that point. And they also develop the beginnings of their oral disc, or their sucker mouth. They can be in the freshwater anywhere from 3 to almost 10 years. And then typically in the ocean, they're there for probably about 2 to 5, I think would be a good estimate. While in the ocean, they're parasitic. They tend to look for rockfish, hake, cod, and actually don't feed on salmon that much compared to some of their other food options, I guess. On the right, we've got some adults that were on their way for translocation, so they're grabbing onto the side of the trash can that we were carting them around in, and they'll use that same oral disc to move up rocks and other things. That's kind of just an example for you there. And then that was my whirlwind of lamprey. I'll stick around and we'll hopefully get some questions. I can also put my email in the chat, and anybody that has further lamprey questions in the Okanagan or elsewhere, feel free to reach out and get a hold of me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, John. So the next person is Ryan Benson. Ryan, thank you. We'll be in touch, John. There's Ryan.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Nitanako kisum onistaxi. Hello, my name is Mooncalf, and from the clan Multoispitex, that's the All Tall People clan. And I will be, hold on a sec, uh, sharing my PowerPoint. So yes, going to be doing a presentation on Semtus, and that's the white sturgeon within in British Columbia waters. So sturgeon or Semtus is the largest freshwater fish in Canada, and it's can be over 6 meters in length and 600 plus kilograms. It's close to 1,000 pounds. And sturgeon, they can live over 100 years. They're not really sure what the maximum lifespan is, but some of those big ones, well over 100 years. And considered a living fossil. It's been in the fossil record for hundreds of millions of years. And the basic body form has been unchanged for since the very beginning. So it's known as a living fossil. And the majority of Canadian populations are listed as endangered under SARA, the Species at Risk Act. And of those populations, there's sort of remnant populations in the Fraser, the Chaco, Columbia, and in the Kootenay. And the Kootenay would sort of incorporate the Okanagan watershed. And down on the bottom there, you can see some pretty big sturgeons. You see a lot of them in the Fraser where they have like 10 people holding them up. So they are, from the diagram, up to the size of an orca. So pretty impressive. So culturally, um, from interviews with Richard Armstrong, they are kind of a divider between the spirit world and people. And within seal winter dance ceremonies, there's protocols where it's kind of passing tobacco under a blanket or mat, and it's the mat represents the person hiding on the other side. So really significant and part of the seal protocols and ceremony. And an interview with Dixon Terbasket says that Simtus has medicine and power similar to siwڵkʷ, so a very sacred animal. Ecologically, really important in the whole ecosystem. They're bottom feeders, and Madeline Gregoire said that it's sort of the historic presence was there as a sort of cleaner of the water. So by cleaning out the rivers and the lakes, and a lot of elders believe that since the dams were put up in the last century, that the water quality has really, really declined. Richard Armstrong also said that historically they were part of the salmon run, and when the salmon were spawning, they would seem to disappear. And then once the salmon died out after spawning, they would return and just feed on the salmon carcasses. So they're, a really important part of the ecosystem, kind of cleaning it up. And it was at that time that seal fishers would go out and start to harvest just after the salmon run. And a lot of our nation team, our technicians have had the privilege of being able to work with sturgeon out in the Columbia mostly, and so a lot of these pictures are our team out hands-on fish and catching and tagging and releasing. So a lot of these pictures are of our team out on the land working with sturgeon. Historically, sturgeon were really important for subsistence, really important food source. Most of the harvest occurred in the fall, which is assumed to be after the sturgeon spawning season. Some of the interviews were the size of a large pickup truck and up to 2 feet thick. So with this amount of meat, Went a long way. It could feed a lot of people. And Richard talks about how his mother was on a I gather it seemed to be like an elite fishing crew, and she was one of the paddlers down on the Columbia. So we had the elite special teams out harvesting sturgeon, and typically they were harvested by harpoons or with set lines. So the big question is, were they actually present in the Okanagan Basin? And I haven't been confirmed stories within the Okanagan, but I've heard a lot of sort of anecdotal and almost like urban legend. We do have confirmation from the interviews that they were down in the Columbia River and in the Arrow Lakes. But there is a Chaptik story from Joe Paul that Sturgeon turned himself into a coyote and was able to walk from Okanagan Lake to Otter Lake just because he couldn't handle the winds and swimming. And so, yeah, given that it's in the Chaptik, it seems pretty reliable that they were in the Okanagan at one point, even before the dams came up. I found a news story, just the local news, that some member of the public found a skull on the banks of Okanagan Lake, and he didn't actually confirm it, just took a picture. But you see in the top right there, there's a sturgeon skull. So to me, that's a lot of evidence that they are there. And back in 2015, we had a team of technicians as part of the salmon harvest, and they actually caught a sturgeon in a Soyuz lake, and it turns out that it came up from downriver on the Columbia, came from a hatchery down there, and flow conditions were really good that year, and he ended up in a Soyuz lake, and so we were able to tag him with a pit tag and release, and yeah, who's to say they might not come back um, within our lifetime. And with that, thanks for listening. And just a caveat that this is actually a Klamath River sturgeon down in Northern California, but this is me in my the prime of my sturgeon wrangling days. And yeah, I was very fortunate, me and my team, that we've been able to work with these powerful relatives. And yeah, it's more than just working with the biology, but just sort of a spiritual connection. So thank you.
Well, fascinating. We could have you well, all of you for a whole hour another time. Now we have to carry. Thank you so much, Brian. We'll wait for the questions for the end. So next, we want to hear about the Okanagan crayfish by Eric Larson. Thank you, Eric.
Just want to confirm, is that sharing the right screen?
Yes, we can see your presentation here.
Great, thank you. I'm faculty in natural resources at the University of Illinois, but I did my PhD in fisheries in Seattle at the University of Washington, which is when I started working on this topic. And I'm really happy to do kind of a quick story about the taxonomic description of the Okanagan crayfish this past year. In Western North America, crayfish diversity is relatively low in comparison to places like the southeastern United States that has something like 400 crayfish species. A U.S. state like Alabama has around 90. And in Western North America, we had 5 recognized crayfish. 2 of these, the Sooty and Shasta crayfish, only occurred in California. The Sooty crayfish was declared extinct in 1977, and the Shasta crayfish was listed as endangered under the U.S. Endangered Species Act in the 1980s. 2 other crayfish, the Pylos and Snake River Pylos crayfish, occurred in southern Idaho and a few neighboring states. They're not known from Canada. And the animal most people associate with crayfish on the West Coast is the signal crayfish, Paciphostachys lanisculus, which is well known for commercial harvest out of the lower Columbia River. And it's also globally invasive in Europe and Japan. It was stocked for harvest and did things people ultimately didn't like. But the signal crayfish had a complicated taxonomic history. It has high genetic diversity, and it had originally been described as 3 different species that were lumped as subspecies over time, and even those subspecies were eventually kind of forgotten. So this is a reproduced figure from a master's thesis from Oregon State University in 1960 that shows the distribution of those 3 Paciphostachys species, Lanisculus, Trobridgei, and Clamathensis. Clamathensis in red, Trobridgei in green, and Lanisculus in blue. And the bar chart next to it is kind of a gradient of different morphological traits that differentiated these species. And you had Paciphostachys lanisculus or Paciphostachys trobridgei, primarily west of the Cascades in the lower Columbia River and coastal tributaries, and Paciphostachys clamathensis had a distribution from the Klamath River in northern California and southern Oregon, interior east of the Cascade Mountains, north to Lake Okanagan. And that's kind of an unusual distribution. It's a long ways from the Klamath to Okanagan Lake for crayfish that don't move very well. And this researcher, George Miller in the 1960s, kind of collapsed these as a single species. And what he was really looking at, Paciphostachys lanisculus had this long spiny rostrum, the bar between the eye stalks on the carapace of the crayfish. Paciphostachys clamathensis had a broader, less spiny rostrum, and Paciphostachys trobridgei was somewhere in between. And you could imagine that might be a trait that's just kind of plastic to your environmental conditions, high or low flows or a high or low predator environment. Similarly, a trait that differentiated these species was claw morphology. Paciphostachys lanisculus had a short, curved palm of the claw. Paciphostachys clamathensis had a long, flat palm of the claw, and Paciphostachys trobridgei was sort of intermediate. And given these kind of intermediate morphologies, this taxonomist in 1960 said, I think we should think of these things as subspecies. I kind of get involved on crayfish in the region during my PhD between 2007 and 2011, and this was really a kind of accidental journey. As a PhD student in Seattle, I started working with a colleague in Japan who was trying to understand where invasive signal crayfish in Japan had come from. So he was looking for genetic samples from around Washington and Oregon to try to learn about how signal crayfish had become so invasive in northern Japan. I started working on doing some genetic sampling, and at that time, the British Columbia Ministry of the Environment heard about our work, and they were curious if signal crayfish were native to Vancouver Island, where it's hard to imagine as a crayfish making it out to the island across the ocean on your own. And when signal crayfish would show up in lakes with things like 3-spine stickleback species pairs, they seemed to be causing those species pairs to collapse into hybrid swarms. So the province was worried if signal crayfish weren't native to Vancouver Island, should they be approving or restricting permits to stock them in lakes for harvest? So we were funded in 2010 to extend our sampling into BC to kind of build a mainland versus Vancouver Island genetics database for the signal crayfish. And in doing that work, we kind of had the surprise that we recovered 2 different lineages by mitochondrial DNA that were farther from signal crayfish than an outgroup in the genus we used as kind of a genetic comparison, the Snake River Pylos crayfish. And this is a complex figure. I would just look at the tree on the far left side, the kind of A panel, where in red, we have this Okanagan lineage. In orange, we have the Central Oregon lineage, and they were farther than our signal crayfish in blue than this other species in the genus. And they had this kind of Paciphostachys clamathensis-like morphology, these broad rostrums, these long flat palms, but they weren't close to the Klamath River, where we were still finding that morphology in things that by the genetics looked more like a routine signal crayfish. So this started the idea of maybe both of these were species that should be elevated to species status. This work was done only with mitochondrial DNA. There, we were apprehensive about missing some of the story from nuclear DNA, another piece of that kind of puzzle of the history of this organism. And over time, this is something I continued to work on when I could from Illinois. We were able to do more genetics work, including the nuclear genome and it continued to support over time that both this Okanagan and Central Oregon animal were two different species that were as far from signal crayfish as the other members of their genus. And I won't spend a lot of time on that phylogenetic tree here, but we elevated the Okanagan crayfish to species status this year in the article linked here. And this is from the paper. We have some plates of our species description. We have a map where the locations I had found the Okanagan crayfish are these kind of red triangles from kind of the Sun Lakes area around Dry Falls in central Washington state, north to Okanagan Lake, and in kind of surrounding lakes on the plateau. Our Central Oregon species is in the John Day River and a few adjacent tributaries. And one minor thing I regret, uh, I did not look around on iNaturalist for how commonly people might be finding this animal in the Okanagan area. And if I had, I may have found that many people are much better photographers than I am. And it would have been really nice to use some photos of some beautiful Okanagan crayfish that people have picked up in the region. Here's a really fantastic looking crayfish from iNaturalist. This is the most recent species observation from this fall. It really shows in this close-up that broad rostrum, that bar between the eye stalks being really wide and not having developed long spines, either at the end of the rostrum or behind the eye stalk. The crayfish is also often very red. Color can be tricky in crayfish, but routinely where we find this Okanagan crayfish, they are a kind of brick red crayfish. Here's another example, two different photographers from iNaturalist in British Columbia and in the vicinity of Okanagan Lake. One of these showing that long flat palm that's often missing this kind of distinctive big white mark at the joint of the movable finger of the claw that tends to be a little more diagnostic of the true signal crayfish, Paciphostachys lanisculus. And the thing I would say about the Okanagan crayfish is I don't think it's uncommon. People are finding it in lakes and streams in the interior of British Columbia and Washington state, but we know relatively little about it in comparison to the signal crayfish, which is really well studied globally, especially as an invasive species in Europe and Japan. And the thing I would kind of conclude on about the Okanagan crayfish is the risk to the organism persisting is largely displacement by other crayfish. In Western North America, crayfish rarely coexist. A native crayfish may be displaced by a non-native by disease transmission. Sometimes it's competition for shelter to avoid things like sport fish predators. Especially warm water sport fish from Eastern North America can be a risk. And so to worry about is the virile crayfish, Faxonius virilis, which is native east of the Continental Divide, is known from the Columbia River in Washington state. I think it has one occurrence record over the border in British Columbia. As a potential invasive species in the region, that could be a threat to displace the Okanagan crayfish. And we'd also worry about the signal crayfish itself. Has been implicated in the extinction and ESA listing of the Shasta and Sooty crayfish in California. Those invasions within a genus in Western North America, something like stalking a coastal rainbow trout over an inland cutthroat trout, can have really unexpected consequences. We don't know if they can hybridize. We don't know if the signal crayfish might displace the Okanagan crayfish if stalked over it. And I can always talk too long about crayfish. I think they were probably isolated from each other by things like Celilo Falls on the Columbia that likely kept coastal crayfish distinct from interior crayfish on the east side of the Cascades. With that, I'll conclude. I have an email address here, and I am always too happy to talk about crayfish. Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. That was really good. Now we need the photographers to go take pictures for you. Anyway, next, mountain beaver, Pontus.
All right, thanks. I assume you can hear me. I'm gonna try to figure out how to share my screen here. Okay, are you able to see that?
Yep, you're all good.
Okay, excellent. Okay, yeah, first of all, thanks for having me here today. I've been looking forward to this for a while. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about the mountain beaver. And first, a little bit about myself. I live, and I'm talking to you today from Mission down in the Fraser Valley, not to be confused with Mission up close to Kelowna there. So I'm talking from the traditional and unceded territory of the Stolo Nation, and yeah, so I've lived here since the mid '70s. Went to UBC straight out of high school, and if you look at the years there, I spent an embarrassingly long period of time studying and getting a few degrees, mostly in forest sciences and studying wildlife. And I worked under a supervisor by the name of Dr. Tom Sullivan, who's actually based out of Summerland, so not far from where many of you folks are from. And did my master's and PhD under Tom Sullivan, who is an internationally recognized small mammal specialist, which lends itself nicely to talking about mountain beavers today. Also spent some time teaching at BCIT in the Ecological Restoration Program, and continue to work with Dr. Sullivan in the Applied Mammal Research Institute as a research associate. And I am currently the environmental manager with West Park Electric. I've been there for almost 14 years now, and we specialize in renewable energy projects. All right, so enough about me. Here's the mountain beaver, and yeah, I kind of wish I'd looked to iNaturalist as well and see if people have cool photos on there. Although I kind of doubt it. They're pretty hard to come across. Very secretive. So I have a lot of photos and video clips in my presentation today, just to let you see what they look like. Because unless you're trapping them, I don't think you're going to see them. Very secretive and live underground for the most part. So here is our cutie, the mountain beaver. Another up close and personal shot here, looking down into one of the live traps. Okay, so whenever I talk about mountain beavers, which is quite a bit, and feel free to jump in here, Eva, and let me know if I go long, because I can talk about the mountain beaver for forever. But I always start by talking about the name. Mountain beaver is the common name, most common name for this critter, although it goes by a lot of different names. But mountain beaver, I think, probably takes the prize as being the most unfortunate name that any species has received that I can think of, because it's quite misleading, and I'll get more into that. Aplodontia rufa is the scientific name. siwڵkʷ, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but that's another name that was taken from First Nations actually during the Lewis and Clark expedition. It's in the records as being called siwڵkʷ, which has since been realized as incorrect, because that's actually the name of the garment made from mountain beaver pelts and not the mountain beaver itself. Siwڵkʷ, the Yakima Indians call it siwڵkʷ. siwڵkʷ, the Nisqually Indians call it. I'm not even sure how I would start to pronounce this one by the Chinook peoples. And boomer is another colloquial name, although I don't understand this one, because in the records they say they called them boomers because of a sound they made, and I've worked with this animal for decades, and I've never heard anything that I would call a boom sound coming from this animal. Okay, so mountain beaver, it's an unfortunate name because they don't only live in the mountains, and they're not a beaver. When people hear the name beaver, they think of the North American common beaver that everyone knows and loves. Big flat tail, webbed feet, large rodent. It is a rodent. The mountain beaver now is a rodent, but that's really all it has in common with the common beaver. So Eric showed us a phylogenetic tree for the crayfish. This is a phylogenetic tree for mammals in general, and it kind of focuses on rodents here. So everything above the yellow line here are the different species, different groups of rodents. And you don't need to worry about reading any of this, of course. I'm just going to point out that Aplodontia down here, is quite distant from castor or the common beaver there. So just to show you how unrelated they are, they're both rodents, but besides that, they're quite different, and actually are more closely related to squirrels than the beaver. So identification, because I'm going to assume that not many people, if anyone on this call, has ever seen a mountain beaver. So just to talk a little bit about what they look like, they're a stocky animal with short limbs, uniformly brown or reddish in color. Except for this, I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen here, but they got a little bit of a white patch just below the ear. That's quite distinctive for them. They have a very short tail, almost like a bunny tail. Got very long claws for digging tunnels. They live underground for the most part. I'll show you some pictures of tunnels coming up here. They weigh about 1 kilogram and are about 30 to 45 centimeters in total length. So excuse the fuzzy picture here. This is just a trail cam that I set up on one of the burrows here last summer, and they don't take great pictures, at least not the trail cam that I have, but this is just to point out its short little stubby tail here. This is mountain beaver just coming out of his burrow and yeah, starting to go uphill, obviously. And here he is as well, poking just out of his burrow. There you can see the white dot below the ear. And another fuzzy photo of him either coming or going into his burrow. And if you look online, you'll often see drawings or stuffed animals of mountain beavers, and you can tell from comparing to the pictures I just showed you, they're not very representative of what they actually look like. So that's why, again, why I throw lots of pictures in my talks. And here's a video clip, and excuse the fuzzy quality here. This is over 20 years old, but here is one that I just set up in the back of my truck after I've been trapping. I wanted to get some video of them moving around. This will just give you a bit of a sense of what they look like and how clumsy and slow moving they are. Here we go. You don't get a great sense of the size there, but I think of them, I describe them as being like a small bunny. Walking around in some hemlock foliage there to give you a bit of a scale. And I think maybe you see my boot coming in here just for a second. Yeah. All right. There's a picture, a close-up of its a front limb here, and of course, massive claws for digging tunnels. And a little video clip here just showing again the size of the animal and the size of the claws there. Okay, I mentioned it lives mostly underground, so it's considered semi-fossorial, rarely seen because of that. But lucky for us, they produce some pretty easy to identify sign in their habitat. Their burrows are easy to identify. They often clip vegetation and leave haystacks to dry outside of their burrows before they pull them underground for eating. And they also have some pretty distinctive feeding sign as well that you'll see around their burrows. So here are some photos of burrows. You'll notice they're left open. Some underground critters like the pocket gophers, you know, they'll have tunnels similar, but they always plug their tunnels up. You'll never see them open like this. So that's yeah, more pictures of tunnels here, and you can also see a lot of, well, this might just be naturally fallen leaves, so that's not the best picture of a haystack, but I do have some coming up. Again, the size of the burrow is, you know, you can stick your arm into it. It's not just a tiny little hole. If you see a tiny hole, it could be a vole or it could be a pocket gopher, but big enough to stick your arm in, it could be a mountain beaver. Another picture of a burrow. More pictures, and these, it's hard to get pictures of burrows because you saw how slow moving they were. They're pretty easy to pick off by predators, so they do like to have security cover. So often their burrows are hiding underneath shrubs or under logs. So they're not always that easy to find. You could walk through a colony and not even realize that you're walking through a colony because they try to hide if they can. And often their burrows are really close to the surface, and so they'll collapse, and you'll see these. They almost look like little water courses, and there could be water flowing through there because, as I'll describe in a minute, they really are closely tied to water. They're always found close to water, and anyway, their collapsed tunnels can look like little water courses. Another burrow entrance. Here you can see he's kicked out a bunch of the big rocks. More burrows. Here, this one, I don't normally see them plugged up, but this burrow entrance was plugged up with some pieces of rotting wood. I'm not sure what was happening there. And so these burrows can go down as deep as 10 feet underground, but mostly they're within a foot or two of the surface. And within there, they have these different chambers. They have an area for defecating. They have food storage chambers, and they also have a nest chamber. And again, these are often found near water, and they can go below the water table. And so they're actually walking through the water. But their nest chamber is always going to be elevated underground and not have standing water in the nest chamber. Some feeding sign, typical of rodent feeding in general, often on a 45-degree angle where they've gnawed through. They also can actually, they have semi-opposable thumbs, and they can climb trees. They won't necessarily climb very high, I've been told. They go up maybe 3 or 4 meters, but still kind of interesting to think of this clumsy little rodent being able to climb a tree. So they'll snip off the branches as they go up, but they'll leave little stubs as a ladder for them to be able to climb up and down. And the thinking is they're probably snipping off the vegetation, and then they'll go down, collect it, and drag it into their burrows for feeding on later. So I mentioned the hay piles. It's just some examples here of pretty easy ways to identify a mountain beaver colony is when you find these burrows, but then you also find drying vegetation often lying at the entrance to their burrows. So here's some horsetail, some cedar, sword fern. Anyway, it makes it quite easy to identify their colonies when you see these hay piles as well. So some history. Coastal First Nations made mountain beaver skins into blanket-like robes. I mentioned the siwڵkw earlier. The Nisqually of the Puget Sound area believe the shotel was the first animal created with life and placed a very high value on its meat. I mentioned the Lewis Clark expedition. That was the first time that Western science became aware of the mountain beaver, and first time it was described scientifically. And we heard the phrase living fossil earlier, and that's true for the mountain beaver as well. They're considered a living fossil. They're the only living member of the genus Aplodontia and the family Aplodontidae. So they're very unique, and they don't really have any close relatives. They have some very primitive characteristics for mammals. They have kidneys that are very limited, that have very limited renal capacity. And what that means, the kidneys are not able to concentrate the urine, and so to expel any toxins, they require a lot of water to flush their system. And so that's why they're always closely associated with water. Yeah, so I mentioned that here. And it's because of this association with water that they ended up with the unfortunate name of mountain beaver. Maybe somebody did confuse them. You would never confuse the two if you saw them, but maybe saw some of the signs, saw something furry running off into the water and thought it was an actual regular beaver. And that's maybe where that confusion started. Mountain beavers do not thermoregulate very well. They can suffer hypothermia at 29 degrees Celsius, so they can't tolerate the heat, but they also can't tolerate the cold very well, which I think will probably leave them a little more susceptible to changes with climate change, unfortunately. And they do not hibernate as well. Global distribution, this is it, the Pacific Northwest. And you can see they peak up into Canada. Only a small amount, about 5% of the population is found within Canada and entirely within BC. So as far as Canada goes, they're quite rare, which has led to its federal listing under COSEWIC. Back in 1999, they were designated special concern, which unfortunately isn't quite the designation that gives them much protection, but they're on the list anyway. And the provincial listing has bounced around from red listed to yellow listed, and now we're back to being blue listed as of last year. So they're on the radar as being a species of concern, of course, and should be managed carefully. This is from the CDC here, showing where there's been confirmed cases in British Columbia. This also includes historic documents. So I can say for sure that these western dots no longer exist. They are only found as far west as Sumas Mountain. But it shows how it does extend in towards the Princeton area and goes as far north as, this is a historic one from even north of Kamloops here. I don't believe that they exist up that far north anymore, but they are found up around Lillooet, south of the Fraser River. And yeah. So I started working in the early 90s. I was introduced to the species because it was thought of as a pest to forestry. That's when I first learned about the mountain beaver. And if you Google mountain beavers, you probably find there's more information out there on controlling them as pests than there is how to conserve them, because that's the issue south of the border. They're much more common and can cause problems to plantations. I'll skim through this because I think my time is probably already up. I worked on some distribution studies and some DNA studies back in 2003. And since 2007, I've written lots of management plans to try to help minimize impacts to the mountain beaver, whether it's from forestry or from some of the transmission line construction work that I do with my company. Some more cute pictures.
Didn't show us one with fleas.
Right. I knew I had to cut my talk short here because I was thinking I was going to have the whole hour to myself, and then I realized no. So I might have a picture coming up, and if I don't, it's just an interesting fact with these guys that they are the host to the world's largest flea, and I know I did have a picture and even a little video clip of the size of this flea, and it's maybe not all that impressive, but it's just kind of interesting to know there's a very specific flea that has evolved with the mountain beaver, and it is the world's largest flea. But yeah, that's true. So here, I'll see. I might have that video clip coming up. I can't remember if I took it out, but here is some more video clips of one sitting inside a have-a-heart trap, actually a tomahawk trap, and not too happy to be there. But often I work alone, so I don't get a chance to take good pictures or video clips. But when they're sitting in the trap, I couldn't resist to take some photos and video. And here's one sitting in a tote. He's just waiting for me to take a little tuft of hair from him for the genetic work we were doing with mountain beavers. Just give you a bit of an idea of what they look like anyway and how they move.
Yeah.
And let's see. Yeah, the final one here goes on for a bit, so I might cut it short. But no need for the sound. But this guy, or a few of them, got a little disoriented. Normally, you let them go and they're instantly back into their tunnel and gone, and not gonna let you take any pictures or video. But a few of them got a little disoriented, and I took the opportunity to take some video of them as they waddle away. And that's it for me. And like everyone else has mentioned, my email's available. I'm more than happy to talk about mountain beavers if anyone has any questions. I'll talk your ear off if given the chance.
Well, we've seen little creatures are cute. We haven't found in siwڵkʷ a name for it still.
Yes.
That's on our task list. And thank you. Thank you all. So now we're opening to the floor. If you guys have any questions, while we still have our 4 presenters here. We did look through the questions, and I think John had a question that he already answered. How do the path? Sorry, let's find the question again. John, do you remember the question you answered?
Yeah, it was asking how lamprey get to the ocean, and I guess the other thing I didn't mention is that they will swim to the ocean on their own. They're not gonna parasitize a fish and count on that fish taking them to the ocean. So they'll swim to the ocean themselves, And then when they return back up into their home waters, they'll also do that on their own. And similar to salmon, they don't feed when they're back in the freshwater. So they have a lot of internal fat, and they'll be in the freshwater getting ready to spawn for 1 or even 2 years, the whole time not eating.
Thank you.
Are we allowed to ask questions over the chat, or do you prefer it typed out?
You can just ask them verbally right now.
Perfect. So I actually have a question for all three of you. As I'm listening to your guys' presentations, thank you so much. I actually didn't know the cultural and even the biological importance of these species before you guys, so thank you so much. The question I have for each of you is, would you say that these species are indicative of the health of their ecosystem, much like canaries in a mine?
Yeah, I can address that for the sturgeon, and yeah, it is kind of a reflection of a lot of the declines were directly a result of all the hydro dams down in Washington and Oregon State, but also up here in the Okanagan system, and yeah, just with the kind of loss of habitat, and it's kind of a circular sort of a thing where without the sturgeon, they're not cleaning the water, and as the water gets muddier, it's kind of like a feedback loop. So generally speaking, yeah, I think so, at least for sturgeon.
Yeah, and I can chime in there for the mountain beaver. I would also agree that they're particularly sensitive to things that um, are human caused. You know, like they used to be throughout the Fraser Valley, and road building, agriculture, anything that compacts the soil is going to have a negative impact on them. So they're pretty good indicators of human disturbance, I would say. Yes.
For the crayfish, we know relatively little about kind of water chemistry or water quality requirements for the Okanagan crayfish, but I would expect in particular that it likely needs coarser or rockier substrates, and something that could really affect it would be silt or sedimentation, and that kind of any silting in of interstitial spaces and coarser rock would be really hard for especially the juvenile or smaller crayfish. I think based on the genus and other similar crayfish, it's likely an indicator of kind of coarser substrate and vulnerability to embeddedness from silt or fines.
Yeah, and I'd add for lamprey, I'd think of them that way as well. They have a complex life history, so there's a lot of different areas that they can be exposed to sort of struggles. They spend a lot of time in the freshwater as juveniles, depending on water temperature. So yeah, I would say that they definitely can serve as an indicator of a functioning ecosystem or a less functional ecosystem.
What can we do to help this then? With everything all of you are talking about, how can we help the species you presented today, us as average people? I think average people tend to distance themselves because they feel so overwhelmed. But surely there's something we can do in our everyday lives to help. Is it just discussing these species? Is there anything within our home lives that we can do that'd be easy to adjust to help um, the things you guys are passionate about? And obviously these are wonderful, and I'd love to continue to have them on our lands.
Yeah, I think for lamprey, unfortunately, they're not the most charismatic looking fish out there. They're thought of as a parasite, and so for a lot of years, there's been a negative opinion of them because they could harm salmon. So really, just getting awareness out that they're cute little guys, and they coexist with salmon and have for longer than salmon have been around. Like I said, the fossil record, they're a 400 million year old species or series of species.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Just to add to John, folks, Rick Hansen's group at UBC, these animals, I'll give an example of lamprey, they're used as biological models for new medicines and regeneration. Lamprey, for example, are used in neurogenesis for people growing back nerves that have had nerve damage and go on. So to answer your point, just elevating this collection of ancient heritage dinosaurs, so to speak, and then adding the health component. These bring a lot of biological models to the field, and each of these sturgeon, mountain beaver, etc. So coming from that angle as well. Thank you. Great presentation, folks. Amazing.
For Pontus, do beavers live in groups? Where are they distributed?
Yeah, the distribution here, more locally for myself in the Fraser Valley, it's interesting that the Fraser River is a barrier to them. They're not found north of the Fraser, but south of the Fraser. Chilliwack Mountain, Vedder Mountain, Sumas Mountain. They're quite common actually. Once you get into the right habitat that hasn't been impacted too much by road building and agriculture. And then distribution going east. It's around the Tulameen, Princeton area is about as far east as they go. And then up north, historically, apparently one specimen found north of Kamloops. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not because that sounds a little far north, but around Lillooet, that's their general distribution. They're referred to as living in colonies, but they are actually solitary animals, other than outside of the breeding season. They're solitary. But they often have their burrow networks neighboring each other. So it does appear as though they're living together, but they are territorial and solitary outside of the breeding season.
Someone's also commenting here that they've heard that mountain beaver may have been up at Shingle Creek area, that is above Penticton. If you can verify that.
That would be further east than I think has been ever documented, but that's a pet project of mine always, is to find where they are, where they haven't been found. So yeah, a couple of my recent observations have extended the distribution further north than was previously known. But that sounds, and the other thing is you get into some pretty dry habitat there too, which is not very conducive to their habitat. But I'd be very curious to follow up on that. I haven't seen it documented anyway.
So Dave was first. Dave, welcome.
Okay, thanks. You've mentioned twice around Lillooet, but your map showed it essentially south of Lytton.
So that's my screw up. It's Lytton, not Lillooet.
Yeah, okay. And from what I've been able to find, the mountain beaver, its siwڵkʷ name is the same as a crab.
So, oh yeah, okay.
Which we don't have up here anyways.
Right. No, anything's better than mountain beaver though, so I should I'll start using it if you let me know what that is.
What do they call it? Okay, if you're done, then Ryan was next.
Yeah, I heard Chaptik, this traditional knowledge that for Shingle Creek beaver, and they would trap sort of the lowland beavers, the actual beavers, and transport them up into the highlands and kind of release them. And because it was late in the season, they would, rather than relocate back downstream, they would hunker down and build dams and stuff upstream, and that would be sort of a reservoir for the next summertime. And so it was a way that Syilx people would manage using beaver translocations. So that's the story that I heard. So yeah, I guess there is traditional knowledge that they were in the Shingle watershed.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, no, a lot of work is going into trying to use the common beavers' activities as ways to restore wetlands, and yeah, some really interesting work going on with that. But the mountain beaver doesn't do any of the damming. I mean, they're important for the ecosystems as a whole, I'm sure, but yeah, they don't do any of the damming. But yeah.
Okay, and L. Harvey was the next.
Yeah, it's Luke. I was just thank you very much for the presentations. I was really interested in the sturgeon presentation to learn more of that history. Ryan, you mentioned some um, discussion about medicine that was used. Could you touch on like various forms that were used in terms of medicine for the sturgeon?
Sure, yeah, I kind of gave the brief overview, but there's the use of sturgeon oil. So just rendering down once it's been harvested, and it was used for, nutrient supplements and for, a food source, energy source, and used for with dried fish and berries. Also, sturgeon stomach that was used like for ceremonial use, and during the winter dances, the stomach was processed, dried, and then kind of divided amongst the dancers. And there's also some just protocols when harvesting sturgeon. So, the bones could not be put back into the river. They were like buried up on land, and then the skull had to be put up in a tree and facing east. So, yeah, there's a whole
Wow.
body of reasons and protocols, but that's kind of just the basics. So that's a whole other, you could
Yeah,
probably do a PhD on the protocols and how to go about.
totally. That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Another kind of separate question I had was, I think you mentioned that sturgeon had challenge accessing certain parts of the Okanagan system, like up in Canada. Was that correct? Is like prior to dams being built, was there still natural barriers that prevented them from getting to certain parts of the system?
So possibly historic Okanagan Falls, which was, a set of falls, but salmon did get up there
Yeah,
during high flows. I
right.
suspect maybe there's times during high water where they could swim openly into the lake.
Yeah.
But once the dams were built, then it pretty much cut off any potential access. And there's a lot of stories that I've heard in Okanagan Lake, especially when they were doing underwater welding, and the sturgeon would come by and be checking out the
Oh wow.
welders. They were drawn to the torches, but at this
Yeah,
point, it's nothing 100% confirmed. But yeah, there's a possible of a stranded population up in Okanagan Lake that just
yeah.
haven't been able to
Okay.
swim down and out to the ocean. But yeah, I firmly believe that they're still there out there. It's a big lake. It's hard to
Yeah, totally.
100% confirm. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing. Very, very interesting presentation.
We are past one now. I see some people had already left. There's a few more questions here. If presenters, do you have time to stay a few more minutes?
For sure.
Okay. Like there's a question about siwڵkw teachings about Okanagan crayfish. Yes, there's many teachings, and there's a relationship between a crayfish and Chinook salmon, chaptical, and I think there's more. And I'm sure there's the same with lamprey. Ryan alluded to that already. Let's see some more questions further down. Yeah, everyone loved you. Everyone thought the presentation was great. That's it. Yeah, unfortunately, people had to run off. Okay, yeah, no, this is good. There's three more. There are more comments, and people had to run off. But yeah, it looks like we'll have to do these kinds of presentations again. This was very informative. Thank you. Oh, there is one more question here. Are fish tracked up past dams in the Okanagan, like Site C? Well, now we do have a fish passage in the Okanagan, into the Okanagan River, Okanagan Lake. But yeah, it's we're kind of running out of time, unfortunately. Ryan, did you want to talk about the fish passage?
Yeah, we just had the fish passage into Okanagan Lake back this past August. And so now salmon can make it all the way up to Okanagan Lake. And like in my presentation where we actually had one in Soyuz Lake, I think it's definitely quite possible at this point, that they can get up past all the dams. But yeah, we'll see. Sky's the limit at this point. So very hopeful.
Yeah. Well, I guess we will leave it at this here now. Thank you. This was really good.